we need to talk about how to do applied behavioral science, how to do this scientific method that is so important, that centralizes behavior and gathers evidence and uses it to make decisions. And the process that we're going to use is something called SIDE: strategy, insights, design, and evaluation. You could use that mnemonic to help people remember things. First, let's focus on that S, that strategy. What do I mean by strategy? So strategy for me is that handoff from the business to behavioral. It's that precise articulation of who is going to be doing what and why when we're successful. You can't do science if you don't know what success looks like. We need to establish the ruler up front. And so strategy is the way that we figure out, hey, where do we want to end up? What does that end state look like? There's a reason my book is called Start at the End. We have to know what the end looks like so that we're more likely to actually get there. The deliverable for this phase is something we call a behavioral statement. It's a very specific articulation of who is going to be doing what, why. So when target audience who has limitations wants to motivation, they will behavior as measured by data. Don't worry too much about that. We'll get into each of those variables and how they fit together and how you decide what they are later. But this is what strategy is. It's articulating the end in this very specific way with a deliverable called a behavioral statement. Once we understand strategy, once we understand where we want to go, we move into a phase called insights. Insights is about helping us understand why we live in the world that we live in today, right? So we use qualitative methods, so user research, direct ways of observing people, and quantitative methods, data science or other ways of observing populations of people, right? So population down and individual up, to understand why people act the way they do. We look at 5 kinds of people. So we're not looking at personas or making up cutesy names for things. Everybody in the world fits into one of 5 behavioral groups. Always, never, sometimes, started, stopped. Whatever behavior you choose, everybody in the world fits in that. It's what we call BeSci. It's mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. Meaning mutually exclusive, everybody fits in only one group at a time. Collectively exhaustive, everybody fits in one of the 5 groups. So if you pick something like watching hockey, there are people who always watch hockey, never watch hockey, sometimes watch hockey, just started watching hockey, or just stopped watching hockey. And we can understand the differences between those groups in order to power change so that we can move people through them. For whatever behavior you care about, there's some natural curve of how much people are doing it today. All we're doing is trying to create an unnatural curve, unnatural variation. We're trying to shift that equilibrium so that people behave in the way that we want. That means we need to understand why the equilibrium exists. Now, underlying this is a cognitive model of behavioral science. I use a very simple one, which is called competing pressures. The idea that there are promoting pressures, things in our environment that make a behavior more likely, and then inhibiting pressures, things in our environment that make a behavior less likely. So when we're changing behavior, we want to rebalance those pressures. But in order to rebalance those pressures, we have to understand what are they and how strong are they today. So before we can go into a design step, we have to understand what's the state of the world today. And that's what Insights really does for us. The deliverable is something called a pressure map. It's a collection of what are the promoting and inhibiting pressures and how strong are they and who do they work for. We arrive at that by coordinating quantitative and qualitative insights so we get cross-validated insights, insights that we have multiple pieces of evidence that tell us are true. That's going to allow us to proceed forward in the best place. It helps us understand the why of the world today so that we can intervene to make a different what. So now that we understand where we want to go, strategy, and we understand the existing equilibrium in the world today through insights, now we get to go to that wonderful step that is design. We have to decide, hey, what are some potential ways, potential interventions that we might run that rebalance those pressures to change behavior? And there's a really interesting little thing in there where you'll learn that I am a lying liar. What am I lying about? I don't actually change behavior, right? I can't pop open brains and find the little behavior button and hit it and then people do the thing that I want. That's not how behavior change happens. Instead, I change pressures that then change behavior. By strengthening promoting pressures and weakening inhibiting pressures, I can make it more likely that someone does something. And if I want something to not happen anymore, I can weaken those promoting pressures and strengthen those inhibiting pressures, and then it'll happen less often. Now, how do I do that? I do that by targeting individual pressures with my interventions. So when I design, I don't design against the behavior as a whole. I say, hey, here's a specific pressure. What are all the things I can do to make that pressure stronger or weaker? So there is absolutely a creative process here, but it's structured around this idea of pressure change. It's structured around these individual features that I then can boil up together to test in our next phase. So in that design phase, the outcome is going to be some potential interventions, and they're all going to be connected to evidence that I generated during the insights phase. They're going to accomplish our strategic outcome, right? That behavioral statement, but they're going to be based on our understanding of the world that we have today that we gathered from insights. Finally, we have evaluation. So we know where we want to go. We understand why we are where we are. We have some ideas about how we might get from where we are to where we want to go, but we're not done. This is where a lot of businesses fail. So a lot of people think, hey, I understand the world, right? I understand these insights that allow me to understand where I am today. So naturally, my designs should work. But that's not good science. The hallmark of science has always been experimentation. You have to test things. They don't work because we think they should work, because we really like them, because they're based on things that we know. They work because we've tried it and made sure that they actually do. The world is a complex place and people's behavior is complex. It is impossible to fully map absolutely everything that is affecting a person. So we have to be able to try things to see, hey, in this soup of pressures, can I exert enough influence to actually change behavior? Now, this is where the difference between academic and applied behavioral science becomes so important. I'm not trying to be perfectly right. Academic science is about being perfectly right, generating an understanding of the world that is so right that other people can build on it without questioning it. I just have to be right enough. That's what business is. Business is academic science, but with a cost-benefit ratio. If something is extraordinarily easy and potentially works, it's worth doing because it's extraordinarily easy to do. In science, we care only about the rightness of something. In applied behavioral science, we care about whether or not it's effective to scale in the business that we have. So we might actually find something that works that we don't scale because it's too expensive or doesn't have enough impact. That cost-benefit ratio is off. So evaluation is about running real-world pilots that are cheap and easy and quick, that gather enough evidence to allow us to say, hey, I should go farther. There's something here. I can take that next step or invest those resources into starting to build something bigger. Sometimes we run more than one pilot. If you're asking for millions and millions of dollars to build something, you want to be really sure, and that means you might need to run iterative pilots. So evaluation is that stage where we take these potential interventions and we start to run valid real-world pilots of them so that we can understand what we should scale. The outcome is something we call an outcome statement, which is basically just an articulation of, hey, here's what we did, here's how well it worked, here's how much it'll probably cost to scale and the kind of effect that you'll get, so that decision makers from the business and operational side can say, hey, that's worth scaling in our business or not. Behavioral scientists are in charge of creating the menu. We don't typically pick from the menu. That's the job of operations and business. They're the ones who are going to order from the menu that we create. What we want to understand is, here's a menu, here's why things are going to taste good, here's how good they're going to taste, here's how much they're going to cost, so that people can choose from that in a more orderly way.